Hello all. Thank you so much for joining us today. Looks like we're getting everyone's information in the chat here, which is awesome. If Sophia, you would like to go to the intro slide for me, I'd appreciate it. Brilliant. Thank you so much. So just as a quick little intro, I myself am Sarah Rose. I am the Communications and Engagement Manager here at Threading Change. So it's nice to meet all of you and have you join us today. We're really hoping this is going to be an educational and exciting event for everyone involved. So thank you for joining. Now, as mentioned, today's meeting is being recorded. You can find it on our YouTube channel after if you want to watch any of the parts over again, that sort of thing. And as Sophia mentioned as well, if you have any questions, just pop those in the chat. You can see here on the screen, we also have a hashtag TC Fashion COP26. During the session, if you want to tweet about it, put it in your IG stories, any of that sort of thing, definitely tag us. Tag our panelists at Stand Earth and Vogue Business as well. We'd love to see all that stuff happening across the socials, and we'll get involved with you there as well. If you want to go to the next slide. Just before we get into the COP content, we do want to do a land acknowledgement. So I myself am tuning in from so-called Ottawa in Ontario. It's located on the unsurrendered, unceded Anishinaabe Algonquin territory, whose presence dates back here to time immemorial. And Threading Change is based in Vancouver, which is on the traditional unceded territory of Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh First Nations. Now, a lot of these land acknowledgements can become quickly just kind of a token of good nature and all that stuff, but we do want this to be a really meaningful practice for everyone. So we urge you, if you haven't already, definitely put in the chat where you're tuning in from, whose traditional land you're on if you are on it. And if you don't know, you can check out the website link here. It's www.whos.land, and you can find out where you're based through that link and that resource. Here at Threading Change, we want to express our commitment to reconciliation, as it is our moral responsibility as settlers to ensure that our meetings and actions are congruent with Indigenous people's values as we walk down this path of reconciliation together. So it's quite important to include this. And just as a quick little outline today, I'm going to hand this off to Isabel in just a moment. We are going to do an intro to Threading Change, who we are, who our team is, our values, all that fun stuff. So if you're not familiar with us as an organization, we'll give you a quick rundown. And then Sophia is going to jump in and give you a recap of COP26 and what you need to know about that event as it pertains to fashion. Then the panelists will have an option to introduce themselves and a little bit of what they do in their organizations. And then we will get into our guided discussion. As mentioned before, really important, all of your questions, pop those into the chat and we'll monitor them because we don't want to lose anyone's questions throughout. So we'll come back to them all at the end. We're also going to have some actions you can take at the very end to make sure you stick around until that. And I'll hand this off to Isabel.
Hi, everyone. It's so nice to have you all here. I'm Isabel. I'm the Communications and Story Map Coordinator. I work with Threading Change, but outside of Threading Change, I'm a designer and artist and researcher within the sustainable fashion community. So to start off, we wanted to start off with this quote because it's something that we keep at the back of our mind all the time when we're doing work at Threading Change. And so the quote is, "Fashion is the Trojan horse of industries. It has all the same problems as every other industry: pollution, fossil fuel addiction, inequitable labor, dirty water, and more. But it's hidden behind this veil of glamour." And so this is something that we like to think about, and also something that we're going to be discussing and how it relates to COP26. And if we can go to the next slide. Perfect. So I'm just going to give a brief introduction to Threading Change. For those of you who don't know, our mission is a feminist, fossil fuel-free fashion future. And this is something that we also carry into everything we do. And it's our mission. It's the why behind what we do here. And it's something that we just carry within all of our projects. And then if you can go to the next slide. So at Threading Change, we do a bunch of different projects. We have so many things on the go. But what today is about is just holding a conversation for COP26. And so we want to start off today with kind of getting to know what Threading Change does. So we're a youth-led, non-for-profit, ethical fashion organization working at the intersectional focus of the environment, gender, and racial justice. And we're working within the framework of circular economy and exploring of what the circular economy can actually mean. And if you go to the next slide. So this is our wonderful, hardworking team. We have so many other members as well. And yeah, we just want to give you an introduction to them and what we do. So we uphold intersectionality, believe that fashion is an extremely complex issue that must be examined from every industry, every angle. And yeah, and we look at fashion through a multi lens view, I guess, not a singular lens, to address these problems and looking at them from multi sectors. And yeah, and so everything we do, we have different disciplines that we're all working under as a team. And we come together as this great family and we work together through all of the different projects. And yeah, we just uphold all the different intersectionalities within fashion and working within justice and working to bridge the links between global ethical fashion brands, innovators, fashion disruptors, and seeing how the local and the global can work together. And then I'll hand it off to Sophia.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for the great introduction, Isabel and Sarah. So nice to be here with all of you today. So I'm going to give a quick overview of what the heck COP26 even is, why it's relational to fashion, why that's important. And we'll go into some panelist introductions because they're really the superstars of today's panel. So the United Nations for nearly 3 decades has been bringing together almost every country on our planet to host these different conferences called COP, which stands for Conference of Parties. COP26 was the 26th edition, which was in Glasgow, United Kingdom. And COP26 was the first United Nations conference to happen in a post-COVID world. So obviously there were many different topics on the table and people were still kind of getting used to what that meant to come back in a post-pandemic life. And there was many countries, organizations there examining the feasibility of renewing climate targets, raising ambition, and also planning amidst the global climate emergency. So on top of a lot of the other commitments that got renewed, the UN Sustainable Fashion Charter is one of those that also have renewed commitments. This is a pivotal moment with many news outlets and industry leaders, one of them being Rachel, who wrote in Vogue Business that the fashion industry is one of those industries that actually can help us maybe being a leader in the space of climate reduction. But we're really here to ask ourselves and discuss today is what does that really mean? Because COP26 saw the UN Fashion Charter drop the renewed statements, which includes updated science-based emission targets, committing to having emissions by 2030, which is an update from the previous 30%, and also achieving net zero emissions by no later than 2050. And the charter also urged big brands to secure 100% electricity from renewable resources with minimal other environmental social impacts, and also for different scopes 1, 2, 3 to be emissions reduction by 2030. But from our board members have gone and other people on our team or people that we spoke to within the industry who've gone, a lot of people felt that fashion was largely left out of the agenda and conversation at COP26, despite it being a universal touch point, not only culturally, but also in many other jurisdictions for fossil fuel emissions reductions. When it was addressed, some people felt like corporate greenwashing took a lead role instead of actually addressing what it means for fashion to be a leader. And there was also not enough representation with there not being many garment workers, union workers present. So with all these different things in mind, and the fact that we at least do have some things that have been renewed and there is ambition that is being raised, we really want to come in today and gather and ask ourselves, what does all this mean? How can we make sense of the jargon? How can fashion become a true solution towards climate action? And what can we improve on? And how can we do that together? And so I am so very excited to introduce you to our 3 panelists today who are experts in this field. Some of them haven't been on COP on the ground directly, who'll be sharing their direct reflections from COP26, its impacts on fashion, and also sustainability. How this next section will go is that I will introduce a panelist, I will then read your bio, they will then give you a 5-minute presentation they prepared. And then we'll do that in the 3 of them. The first one is Mohamed, then we have Paninda, and then we have Rachel. And after we'll have our dedicated question answer period with 4 questions, which each panelist will have an opportunity to answer the question. And so to start off, I'm very pleased to welcome Mohammed. So Mohammed works as a senior climate campaigner fashion at Stand.Earth. He joined the Stand.Earth team in March 2021 to challenge global fashion brands to take strong action to phase out fossil fuels and become a catalyst for a just green energy transition in countries where their products are manufactured. After realizing the critical role that environmental pollution and injustice play in shaping health inequities during his graduate studies, Mohammed decided to pursue a career as a campaigner to help put in place, government and corporate policies that put the health of people and environment first. Very noble. In his previous role as a toxics campaigner at Environmental Defense Canada, Mohammed led effective campaigns to eliminate toxic chemicals such as biophenols, I think I'm saying that right, and also PFAs from consumer products, hold corporate polluters accountable by improving environmental law enforcement, and also reform Canada's cornerstone pollution prevention law, the Canadian Environmental Protection Act, CEPA, to better protect vulnerable populations and environmental justice communities. Wow, that is amazing. We're so lucky to have Mohammed with us here today. And Mohammed, the floor is yours.
Thank you for that super generous introduction. Kind of blushing right now. So yeah, I'm just really pleased to be a part of this. Thank you for putting it together. I think this is really important, and especially bringing the perspectives of all the speakers and threading change, and everyone who's on the call today or on the webinar today, because I would like to hear from everybody. This is about not just what's Stand.Earth is doing, but also what everyone else is really interested in terms of how we can all collectively work to move the fashion sector to become better, because there's literally so much work to do to move this sector forward. I'm going to share some slides to walk you through a couple of things that we're doing at Stand, and I think some visuals will always help. So just give me a moment to do that. All right, can you see my slides? Yes, okay,
Yes, we can see your slides.
Okay, so just very quickly, I'm Mohammed Malas, my pronouns are he, him. I am in Hamilton in Ontario, which is on a traditional territories of the Erie, Neutral, Huron-Wendat, Haudenosaunee, and Mississaugas. And what I work on at Stand.Earth is really the fashion campaign. And the goal for our campaign is to phase out fossil fuels from the supply chain. And this is very key, the supply chain of the fashion industry. Not what you often hear about when you are looking at the sustainability pages of fashion companies and brands, where they often talk about what they're doing in their stores, in Toronto, in Vancouver, in London, in some of the urban centers, and how they've eliminated plastic bags, or they're sourcing renewable energy, but looking at where the vast majority of their emissions lie, and that's in our supply chain. So this graphic helps to kind of illustrate that issue, where we know and companies know that more than 90% of their greenhouse gas emissions or climate emissions come from their supply chain. So that's the manufacturing, that raw materials production, the shipping of their products, not shipping to the consumer, but the shipping that happens before the product is made, and until the product is made before it's sold to the consumer. The stores and the headquarters only make up usually much less than 10% of the emissions. And that's where the industry has mostly focused on in terms of efforts to become sustainable, which is really unfortunate. And in essence, a form of greenwashing. What's the issue when it comes to their supply chain? We know that the fashion industry has major problems when it comes to water pollution, labor rights issues, and toxic pollution, from the dyeing and preparation of raw materials, deforestation, so many things. But at the heart of its climate problem is the issue of fossil fuels. Many of these companies, including some of the biggest brands that we know of, like Nike and Zara and Adidas, Lululemon, they continue to rely on coal to power the manufacturing facilities in countries like Vietnam, Cambodia, and China. And that comes at a major cost to the communities and the workers because of the toxic pollution that coal burning has. And there's also issues with the fossil fuel fabrics like polyester and nylon, which we are seeing from research could be responsible for up to 20% of emissions of brands on average. And then shipping is also an increasing problem because of the use of toxic fuels in ships, and that also contributes to their emissions. So what are we doing about this at Stand? So one of the tools that we use to try to help illuminate where industry and brands need to take action is through our fossil-free fashion scorecard, which we published in August of 2021. And what we do is we benchmark companies on not only their promises, but their actions. What are they doing to actually decarbonize, move away from fossil fuels? And as you can see in this slide, we had 47 companies. 36 of them got a grade of D+ or below. And even, when you look at the top, so Mammoth, which is a Swiss kind of outdoor gear and sportswear company, they received the highest grade, but it's still a B-. And some of the other brands that did relatively okay, it was mostly in the C's. So there's lots of work to be done, even by those who were graded at the top or the top 10 or 11 companies. But really looking at the companies that are at the bottom of the grade scale here, one company that stands out to us is Lululemon, because this is a company that's based in Vancouver that constantly talks about its how it's for the wellness and the well-being of people, but most of their sustainability efforts so far have been just greenwashing, and they're not really doing much to move to renewable energy in their supply chain, which is key if they want to reduce their emissions by 2030 in line with a 1.5 degree warming pathway. So one of the other things that Stand is doing currently is we have a campaign to push Lululemon to become to move from being a climate lagger to a climate leader, because they have a huge opportunity to do so. They're one of the fastest growing companies, fashion companies in the world, and even during COVID, when we had a global recession, Lululemon made more money, but also their emissions went up. Most of the other fashion brands saw a dip in their emissions, but Lululemon's emissions actually went up significantly, and that's a big problem. So that's why one of the companies that we're focusing on right now is Lululemon, because again, their climate footprint is massive, but also there's a huge opportunity for them to actually be a climate leader. So just very quickly, and I know this was touched upon, from Stan's perspective, at COP26, the UN Fashion Industry Charter Renewal, had a couple of things that were good. There were some steps forward in terms of realigning emissions reduction ambition with the Paris target, and also a phase out of onsite coal by 2030. What does that mean? Onsite coal is basically burning coal on site in factories, so water boilers, which are used in the dyeing and processing of fabrics. Huge emissions and toxic pollution. So that commitment is really massive. But what it fails at doing is committing to switching to 100% renewable electricity in a supply chain, which is really important. And it also opens a door for increasing the use of fossil fuel-based fabrics like polyester in the materials that companies rely on. And I'll stop here and pass it on to the next speaker and look forward to the discussion.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Mohamed. Really appreciate it. Next up, just want to welcome Paninda. Just give me a quick second to pull up the slides. Just love technology, don't we? There you go. Okay, so next up we have Paninda. Paninda wears many hats, one of them being one of our lovely board of directors at Threading Change. And she's also a dear friend, so really excited to have her here today. Let me just, one sec. Here we go. So Penenda is deeply committed to building a sustainable, prosperous, equitable future, and to also help people understand and respect the interconnectedness of our world. She specializes in building strategies that consider environmental, social, and economic prosperity. She is an experienced leader in ESG, employee and stakeholder engagement, impact measurement, and sustainability reporting. Penenda is a member of the board of directors for Threading Change, an international youth-led ethical fashion organization. Oh, that's us. And also Leading Change, which supports the development of young sustainability leaders. She's active in her local community as a member of the Global Shapers community. Currently, she's a graduate student in the Master of Science Sustainability Enterprise and Environment program at the University of Oxford. And she has also been recognized as one of Canada's top 30 under 30 sustainability leaders, and as a Clean 50 honoree for her contribution to the advancement of climate action. Penenda, the floor is yours.
Thanks so much, Sophia. And hi, everyone. Really delighted and grateful to be in conversation with all of you here today. So as was mentioned, my background is in corporate sustainability and climate justice activism. And as a sustainability consultant, I have been helping organizations transition towards a green economy. I've guided organizations across different sectors, including beauty, energy, and fashion, through the process of developing and implementing sustainability strategies. And this means helping organizations improve their environmental and social impact, set credible targets, and really engage across the supply chain, while also helping them disclose their impact in a transparent and accurate way. So I'm coming to this conversation on sustainable fashion with that critical lens of a practitioner and a climate justice advocate. I think organizations have a key role to play in addressing the interconnected environmental and social crises that we're facing today, while also really acknowledging that they operate in a broader system, which means that we really need an all hands on deck approach. So I had the privilege of attending COP26 last month, and my focus at the conference was really following the negotiations, and in particular on the loss and damage track of the negotiations. So I'll talk a little bit about the negotiations aspect of COP and some of the key outcomes there, and to provide a bit of a background on how the process goes. Attending COP can be quite an overwhelming experience, and there's always a lot going on. There are the negotiations on one hand, and then there are also these things called side events on the other hand, where private and public sector organizations, showcase their efforts around how they're addressing climate change. It's sort of a trade show of sorts sometimes, where there can be quite a lot of greenwashing. And then there are also demonstrations from civil society that are demanding credible action, and press conferences happening as well. So this was my third COP, so I sort of knew what to expect going in, but there's always quite a few surprises. I was at COP26 as an observer with a civil society organization, and I did have access to the negotiations, but there were quite a few limitations and concerns about accessibility voiced, as you may have heard, from civil society organizations, really limiting their participation in the negotiations given the pandemic. And delegations from Global South countries also faced quite a lot of hurdles in attending and participating in the conference as well. In terms of some of the key outcomes from COP26, from a negotiations perspective, overall, I think the assessment has been that it has been insufficient, but there was some progress. So for the first time, countries agreed to take action on fossil fuels and include the words fossil fuels in the resulting Glasgow Climate Pact, despite the final text around that being watered down. And at COP26, the Paris rulebook was finalized, which sets the rules for the operationalization and implementation of the Paris Agreement. So this means rules around transparency, how countries report, rules around common timeframes, so how often countries are to submit their nationally determined contributions or climate pledges, and also rules around carbon markets. And one of the key areas of disappointment at COP26 was around loss and damage financing. So loss and damage is a phrase that is used for the destruction already being caused by the climate crisis on lives and livelihoods and infrastructure. And vulnerable countries like Bangladesh, which has a large garment industry, are already facing the impacts of the climate crisis today. And so they appealed along with G77 in China for financing for loss and damage through the establishment of a formal facility. But this was not included in the final Glasgow Climate Pact. I think now that we have the Glasgow Climate Pact, it is important to hold leaders accountable for advancing climate action. I think coming out of COP, two things are clear. We need accountability and we need climate leadership. And in both of these aspects, we really need to be cognizant of whose voices are centered. And it should always be the ones who are most affected, whose demands should inform the solutions that we need to implement to ensure that justice is front and center. And so that we're not reproducing the dynamics and power structures that have created the crisis that we're facing in the first place. So yeah, maybe I'll pause there.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Peninda. Couldn't find the mute button. Great. And last but certainly not least, I'm very excited to welcome Rachel. When we got Rachel as a speaker, I was absolutely starstruck. She's a senior sustainability writer for Vogue Business. Senior sustainability editor for Vogue Business. I have read her articles for many months and just really look up to her. Previously, Rachel has covered and also occasionally still covers food and agriculture, environmental science, health and global development for other publications, including Nature, Science, Civil Eats, and also the New York Times. She's currently based in the United States. And Rachel, the floor is yours.
Thank you. That was also very kind and generous. So thank you for that introduction. Hi, it's great to be here. Let's see, I'm based in Denver, which is traditional Cheyenne, Ute, and Arapaho land, and my pronouns are she, her. And I don't have a presentation. I'm just gonna talk. So yes, I'm senior sustainability editor at Vogue Business, which means I cover sustainability in the fashion industry. For me, that is a very sort of I take an intersectional lens, I guess, to sustainability. I always have sort of mixed feelings about that word because it just feels sort of buzzy, but I try to cover the environmental impacts and sort of solutions for generated in and that are applicable for the fashion industry, the social sustainability side, and really my sort of priority in my stories, my coverage, what I hope to sort of bring to light is how they're all connected, and I guess one of my sort of goals in my work is to help the industry, whoever is reading, to see that a lot of issues are often treated as siloed, and that solutions are sort of as well, and that they like a lot of sort of easier solutions that are end up being scaled are ones that have kind of unintended consequences. So I like to look at sort of the holistic nature of the problems that we face, and how we need comprehensive solutions for them. So and so I mean I would echo a lot of what everyone else so far has said. Muhanna's point about the polyester, like recycled polyester, I think it's probably the most ubiquitous example of something that that a lot of people are calling a false solution. Like it reduces impacts, it reduces emissions, carbon emissions compared to virgin polyester, but that doesn't make it a sort of silver bullet. It's just sort of a little bit better than what we started with, but that's not where we're sort of needing to go. And to another of Muhanna's points, that chart that showed kind of the rankings of different brands, I think that was a good visual of another sort of theme that comes up a lot for me, in that fashion sustainability efforts have tended to just focus on sort of what is possible, what is practical today, and sort of reducing the negative impacts. Like, this is what we're doing, but there's very little focus on where we kind of need to be, where the planet needs to be, where people need the industry to be in order to be in an actual sustainable industry, and sustainability being a word that has meaning of being able to support future generations on the planet. So that's me. That's my reporting. Again, I covered a lot of issues outside of fashion before coming to this role. So I think that is helpful for me to sort of bring that outside perspective, I hope. For me, COP, I did not attend. I think I would just echo a lot of what's already been said. It's, there was a lot of, there were some, the level of ambition seemed to increase, but the efforts with the supply chains still seem to be maybe too slow or just unconvincing. There's I didn't see a ton of funding commitments that are necessary from the industry to enable the change that they are committing to meet in whatever timeline that they're committing to. So again, back to Muhanna's point, that's that's the supply chain emissions, and that takes investment and in partnership with suppliers, and brands are not always doing that. So anyway, those are the things where I try to sort of focus my reporting, and I think I'll be better at questions than at rambling. So I will leave it there. Thanks for having me here.
Thank you so much, Rachel. Now that we've heard from all of our three amazing panelists, we can start and go ahead into the Q&A period. We'll spotlight the video for each of the panelists as they speak, and feel free to just jump in popcorn style if you have something to add. So the first question is, as mentioned previously, during this COP, the UNFCCC Fashion Industry Charter for Climate Action proposed different new targets. So this includes 100% electricity from renewable resources across operated and owned facilities, sourcing environmentally friendly raw materials by 2030. And also these goals are designed to support the ambition of the Paris Agreement in limiting global temperature rise of 1.5 degrees Celsius above pre-industrial levels. And so and also recognizing and encouraging brands to set science-based targets to actually opponent emissions reduction. So what we want to know is, what does decarbonization actually look like and mean for big fashion companies, and is it possible? Whoever wants to go first.
I think Muhanna should go first.
Okay. Sure, I can take a first stab at this. Is it, if I heard it correctly, you asked if it's possible, right? It's absolutely possible. I wouldn't be doing this work if it wasn't possible. I think we wouldn't be having this conversation if it wasn't possible. It's possible, and I think I'm optimistic that it will happen, because while we have seen a lot of foot dragging over the past many years from the fashion industry and from fashion brands specifically, I think we're seeing a lot more pressure from the public, from consumers, from investors, from people who work in these companies to do a lot better. And I think there's now awareness that just adding some, even though recycled polyester is not a sustainable solution, just adding some recycled materials to your fabric and putting that on a label is not going to cut it. And that's why we saw the industry come together at COP. And but more broadly speaking, economically, renewable energy has never been cheaper. And that's where the world is going. And what we need to see from the fashion sector is two things. Fashion brands specifically. So this is outside of the UN Fashion Charter. UN Fashion Charter is just one mechanism, but really what matters most is what each individual brand does. And what we want them to do is to start investing in increasing the use of renewable energy in their supply chain, helping the suppliers to move away from coal, add rooftop solar, access power purchase agreements for renewable energy. And we also want them to start advocating for policies in the countries where their products are being made, like Vietnam, like Cambodia, to stop the rollout of new coal power plants and expanding coal power, and to invest and put in place policies that will promote renewable energy in those countries. Fashion industry is an instrumental client of energy in those countries, and their word is going to matter, and they have a lot of market power to exercise as being a $1.5 trillion sector. So yes, it's possible. And decarbonization, I think, what it looks like is basically moving to renewable energy by 2030 across the supply chain.
I can just add a little bit. I mean, I think I would just say yes to all of that, and then and just sort of more broadly, it seems to me like it's about sort of systemically changing the industry, that it's not like a product by product process. It's really sort of at the brand level, and really at the kind of infrastructure of the industry level, and brands just need to really, like, there's so much that needs to change, like everything from like the terms of contracts between brands and suppliers, because right now supplier is sort of on suppliers to implement all of the like sustainable practices, better working conditions, wages. It's like it's their responsibility, but they're not paid enough often, or given the right terms in their production orders to be able to meet what brands are saying that they want. Right, exactly. So I'm just looking at the chat and the Walmart. Not like so forcing suppliers to do things without paying for it is problematic. And if not paying for it outright, then there are ways to sort of just like pay price premiums for products, or giving longer lead times. And there are things called, there's like a Better Buying Institute that focuses all on this. But it's also about business models and reducing sort of the overproduction problem and where all of the waste goes. And so it's for me, there's been what I think I notice is there's a lot of focus on the emissions as sort of a number that exists in a vacuum almost, and it's just more than that. It's there needs to be more of the justice part of climate justice in the climate change conversation.
Did Rachel freeze for anybody else? Yes. Okay.
Yes.
Maybe we'll give her a few seconds. Or Panenda, do you have any thoughts to jump in? We can go back to Rachel.
Sounds good. Yeah, I can jump in. Yeah, I agree with everything that that has been said so far. And maybe you'll just add that, you know, the fact that the fashion industry is so interconnected with other sectors. So it is going to require collaboration across industry, across different sectors, and across the supply chain. And another thing I think need to keep in mind is that, you know, as has been said, we need actual and rapid emission reductions. And one of the key points of contention at COP26 and broadly, as we're seeing, has been the rightful criticism by civil society of these net zero by 2050 targets, which are seen as a form of climate delay. And, you know, really looking at what do these targets cover, and what are the interim timelines that have been set by these brands and these companies, and the extent to which they include these scope 3 emissions, which much of the emissions from large fashion companies are part of, are in their supply chain and are included in the scope 3 emissions. So the extent to which companies are measuring these, reporting on these, and the extent to which they're including these emissions in their reduction targets is also really important. The other aspect I'd like to touch on is, you know, the fact that it is going to require transformation of business models. And so the extent to which companies are going to operate in a way that really centers environmental and social considerations in how they're making their business decisions, and how are they recognizing planetary boundaries and social conditions within which their business operates, and are they taking a life cycle view of the materials and their overall operations? Are they, for example, looking at different forms of governance like shared ownership? Are they paying their fair share of taxes? And are they engaging in political lobbying and policy processes in a way that aligns with their environmental and social goals and doesn't impede those? So I think in the fact that, you know, broader regulation is also really important and required, and because of that, environmental and social risks are now being seen as business and financial risks because of this shifting landscape. I think, as Mohammed was saying, you know, hopefully because of these converging criticisms from investors and demands from investors, civil society, that will potentially spur industry in making some key advances soon. So there is, you know, potential, but swift action is definitely required. So I'll just see if Rachel's back.
Rachel, you there? Can you hear us?
Yes, I'm here. Sorry, I joined from my phone hotspot. Sorry, we've gotten wind advisories for the last day. So
No.
yeah, but sorry, I didn't, I actually thought about telling you that it might go out, but I didn't expect it to actually happen. So yeah, I kind of lost my train of thought. I think I was just saying that people need to be more part of the push for decarbonization, that it's a sort of package effort that needs to that comes with a lot of changes other than just renewable energy, although renewable energy is, you know, also sort of top line priority.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for all the very thoughtful responses. So the next question, I'm actually going to amalgamate our question with a question from Jake from the audience, because it's a really good question. And it's just discussing how in all of these conversations, not all the relevant stakeholders are present. When I went to COP25 in 2019, there was not a single government worker or union worker up on the stage, and they were not, you know, invited to speak. This year at COP26, similarly, there was very little representation from government workers and also union workers. And so that being said, you know, we also have to take into account the humanitarian aspects of the fashion industry as well. So this relates to Jake's question, in which he's saying, how are fashion companies making the supply chain more resilient from an ESG perspective? Decarbonizing is a big one, but also increasing transparency, such as fair trade, eliminating greenwashing, slave labor, etc. and resiliency from a climate change perspective to meet increasing consumer demands. So in many of these conversations, we're still very much hearing it from a romanticized view about climate and sustainability, if you will. And some argue that because it's a UN climate conference, that's the case. But as we know, we're going to be using the 3 pillars of sustainability. Sustainability is not just environmental, it's social, economic, and sometimes even can be political as well. So in this case, how is your work kind of dug into that social side of fashion sustainability? And how do you think the fashion industry can kind of take that and improve from that? It's a big question. So whoever wants to jump in.
I guess I can jump in. I would just say again that it goes back to, or one key part of it is bringing suppliers and workers, you know, not just factory owners, but workers into more of the conversation. Suppliers are, you know, when there's like you know, a fire or there are, you know, terrible working conditions, brands sort of distance themselves and say, we can't believe this, we're shocked, and we you know, like this isn't these aren't our standards, and we don't honor our suppliers, so there's not much we can do. And you know, there's always people with sort of different operating standards in different industries. So there might be some sort of, you know, bad apples, but for the most part, suppliers, you know, want to operate with good working conditions, and they want to reduce their environmental impacts. But again, it just gets back to sort of the contracts and just them having more of a say in how the industry is run, and just being more partners with brands rather than just suppliers to brands. And then the same for end of life conversations, and sort of where everything goes when we're done with it. So communities in the global south that are taking a lot of our waste currently, or what we don't think of as waste but ends up being waste, like unsold resale inventory and goodwill donations and things like that. So and again, also just having more scientists involved in brand sustainable sort of strategy planning, getting people who know the issues that brands are supposed to be or trying to work on, to, you know, to sort of check on their strategies and make sure that they are effective in addressing the problems in ways that will, you know, drive the progress that we need, rather than just sort of, you know, reducing a few pounds of carbon emissions here or there, or, you know, reducing chemical use, but still causing harm to, you know, an aquatic ecosystem or whatever it might be.
Linda, Mohamed, anything to add before I move on to the next question? If not, it's okay. There's lots of questions.
Sure, I can add just a couple of thoughts. But on the point of transparency, transparency is key, because you can't change what you don't know. And in many cases, that transparency is important, not just from a public accountability perspective, but for also brands to actually know where they should be focusing on in their supply chain in terms of addressing pollution issues or other problems. But just on you know, one, so our Stan's campaign is really focused on fossil fuels, because if you think about what fossil fuels have done for the fashion industry, fossil fuels have enabled this fast fashion crisis that we're in, right? So the reliance on cheap sources of energy like coal, and, you know, just being able to pollute as much as they want without having to account for that in you know, as a cost of business, and also the reliance on cheap fabrics like polyester, right? That's what we're seeing, you know, when it comes to fast fashion brands like Zara and H&M and many other brands, but also in sportswear. The use of fossil fuel fabrics is a big problem. So our campaign is trying to disrupt this business model by taking away fossil fuels from the model. And the idea here is, it's not going to fix all of the problems, but it's going to compel companies to start to think about how to redesign the sector, and how to redesign how they run their business. But ultimately, there's still going to be a big problem with production, and whether we're using fossil fuels or not, we can't continue producing more and more and more and more fashion at the rate that we've seen the production of fashion and apparel increase. That's just not gonna work. But that's a bigger question.
Sorry, okay, got the mute button. Great, so we'll move on to the next question. So a big criticism in the fashion industry is a desire to move fast towards new technologies. Now, digital fashion is really catching on, and also, always continues innovating for circular materials, which is good. But at the same time, when they're so focused on technological advancements, they fail to properly focus on the now, which includes issues related to compensating workers, providing living wages, and also making fashion fair. After your attendance at COP26 and also this experience with the fashion world, how do you think we can do this balance between technological innovation and also human innovation, if you will?
I'm happy to go first.
Yeah, please.
Okay. Yeah, I think obviously we do need deployment of technological solutions to move towards more circular models that result in rapid decarbonization. But at the same time, what Rachel said, we don't need false solutions. So keeping in mind what exactly the technology that is being deployed is meant to address is also really important. But this really shouldn't be seen as a trade-off between, tech innovation versus tackling some of these key social issues. So human capital, labor, incredibly important. The fashion industry cannot function without them. So the problem is that it has been kind of undervalued and exploited. Garment workers are at the heart of the fashion industry, but aren't treated fairly and often come from marginalized communities. I think so. Remake's 2021 accountability report on the fashion industry showed that almost no fashion brand or retailer that they included in their assessment pays a majority of its workers a living wage. So how do you ensure a just transition towards a circular economy or circular business model that moves away from this take, make, waste system to a closed loop, and also ensure that no one is left behind during this transition. So I think there's really a need for a long-term view that necessitates investment in worker-driven well-being efforts. And as Mohammed was saying, also really looking at the question of production and grappling with that in terms of what it means for the entire fashion industry to shift its purpose and business model. So in terms of how we get there, I think legislation is important, especially around workers' rights and conditions, and also around executive compensation. And also, if investors make this a key priority when it comes to some of these social conditions, that impact will cascade down to the company level. I also think having financing tied to meeting some of these social performance targets, for instance, through instruments like the sustainability linked loans, can also allow for a greater balance between tech innovation and some of these human innovation goals.
Amazing. Thanks so much, Purnenda. Seeing that we're short on time, I'm just going to go ahead quickly to the last question and feel free to jump in, any of the panelists. It's been a really riveting conversation so far, and I know all of our audience agrees the chat is on fire. So last question is kind of in relation to the audience. What can those listening who wish to see positive change in fashion do to help?
I can jump in very quickly. And I'll just say that COP is not where change happens. It's actually what happens between the COPs that matters most. What people can do is, because again, this is not a consumer issue. Yeah, you can, make choices about what you're buying, and that definitely helps and is important. But we need a systems change. So what you can do is get involved in campaigns that are harnessing collective power, people power, to put pressure on companies to rethink how they're running their business and address issues like fossil fuels, like labor rights. I mean, one of the things that we're seeing that's really alarming and frustrating is the fact that we're still seeing evidence that there's forced labor in the supply chains of these companies. So that's an issue that you really, pick a single issue and get involved in a campaign that is trying to move that forward. And I think that's really the most important and most effective thing you can do to help change the sector and move it in the right direction.
I would agree with that and echo the fact that it's not a consumer issue, but at the same time, consumers aren't separate from it either. So there is a role for consumers to play in buying from brands that are moving the industry in the direction that that you would want to see, and in some cases maybe buying the things from bigger brands that sort of send the signal to them to do more of that, rather than just as sort of like a just like a one-off eco collection or whatever, but also just not buying things. We don't have to buy things. Just like part of the problem is overproduction. So if like maybe buying less in mass would help brands sort of accelerate their search for alternative business models. So I think there is a role for the consumer, but it's not for the consumer to solve at the same time. Just wanted to add that.
I agree with everything that's been said, so nothing else to add on my end.
Brilliant. Thank you so much to all three of you for joining us today and for being part of this conversation. I know I learned a lot. I know everybody else learned a lot as well. This already happened. We had some really good questions in the chat. So here at Threading Change, we are very much a collaborative and a solutionary organization. We try to offer as many solutions as for problems we try to highlight. Here are some actions to take. Nowhere to Hide is a report at Stand.Earth is just released with Slow Factory on how fashion industry is linked to the Amazon forest destruction. Please check that out. Vogue Business, Rachel has some amazing articles that are relating to fashion, as she said, but also other topics as well. So you can check that out as well. There is also signing of different letters you can use to demand fashion brands to stop using leather. Donate. You can also donate and support some of Threading Change's work to help us make an impact. And we also have a global innovation story map, which we're continuously featuring brands that are changing the game and also deserving to be at these conferences to really talk about how they're writing the harm of the fashion industry. And we're also doing different COP26 roundups. We have posted various links in the chat today of Mohanad's work, Paninda's work, and also Rachel's work. So we'll be sending out a dedicated email later after this with all those links and other ways in which you can get involved. As we may have seen, some folks have put their LinkedIns in the chat. If you'd like to do so, feel free. Panelists, if you want to share LinkedIn, if anyone has any questions for you, want to stay connected, if you're okay with them asking you questions, feel free to also put your email in the chat so they can get in touch with you. I just quickly want to mention that 13 Change, we're currently doing our Giving Tuesday fundraiser. We have a fundraising goal of 5,000. Invest will double our impact. So if you're interested, it would really help us out if you could help us donate, keep different programs like this free, and also help us continue our global innovation story map. That is 13change.org/donate. And last but certainly not least, there's some of our different socials. We're pretty much spreading change on every single platform. But we also have the links of different panelists on there. So Stand.Earth, VogueBusiness.com, and also some of their LinkedIn's if you'd like to get in touch with them and also keep the conversation growing. And we'll be sending out a post-event survey after this. You can fill out to give us any feedback. If you have any feedback about future webinar topics, future panelists. And yeah, that's pretty much everything from now. Pro 13 Change team to yours. Thanks so much for joining us today. We'll be doing more discussions in this series. What Mohamed said is so true. COP26 is not where change happens, it's in between. So we hope to feature so many other amazing panelists, change makers, policymakers, and designers in the many, many months to come before COP27, and also continue to do this work and make sure that we help right the harmful fashion industry. And with that, thank you so much, everyone. We hope we have a great rest of your day.
We'll keep the meeting open here just for a couple more minutes while people drop in the chat their contact information. If you want to just pop that in there now, we're getting it all compiled for you.
Thanks for having me. It's great to be here.
Thank you, Rachel, for joining us even with the power out.
Thank you so much.
Okay.
Thank you so much for organizing this. This was great.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Bye, everyone.